we are very pleased to be joined here for the first few minutes of the show by President Trump's Secretary of Veterans Affairs, VA Secretary Robert Wilkie, now with us live here on Montana Talks, here this Tuesday, the day after Memorial Day. Mr. Secretary, an honor to have you on the show. Thanks for being with us this morning.
Aaron, thank you. And you work for one of my favorite people in the world, Ryan Zinke.
He's a character.
Our paths crossed for the first time many years ago down at Little Creek, Virginia. He was a SEAL. I was just an intel weenie. And no, he's a great American, and he sure loves his home state.
Well, what do they say? Intel drives operations, right? So
that's right.
Don't count yourself out there.
You're right. You know? And, one thing I will say in the special warfare community, particularly in the Navy, and I've had intelligence assignments all over, no one consumes intelligence more voraciously than Navy SEALs do. It was always a pleasure being around them because they listened. They listened in a way that other parts of the military don't, but it was an honor to be just in the presence of those warriors.
Well, Secretary Wilkie, I know we've only got you for a short time this morning, but greatly appreciate you joining us. First off, you're familiar with the headlines out of Montana. I mean, in past years, when we were at the height of the VA scandal several years ago, Montana had some of the worst wait times in the country. But I know we still struggle with those wait times today. Are we going to start seeing some more advanced progress on that front here?
Well, the good thing about Montana now is that it is one of 5 states with exceptions to normal VA procedure or process, in that Montana veterans have full choice because of the rural nature of the state. In terms of VA overall, in January, the Journal of the American Medical Association said that our wait times are as good or better in the major medical categories than they are in the private sector. It has gotten a great deal better. I think it's going to continue to get better, particularly as we start to move toward an electronic health record, which means that for the first time, a young American who walks into a military entrance processing station has a record that he can now hand off to VA when he gets out of the service, rather than carrying around a paper record. On June 6th, we will kick off the Mission Act, and that will have a computer program called a decision support tool. So if a Montana veteran goes to Fort Harrison and we can't provide the medical service that veteran needs, the decision support tool will point that veteran in the right direction toward care in the private sector.
There's been another challenge in the Montana VA system, too, and it's the constant turnover in leadership. In fact, I think Matt Hudson had a piece in the Lee newspapers about a year ago, a little under 1 year ago, that talked about how the interim chief of staff was preceded by 8 other temporary chiefs of staff at various times. And then the top position, I mean, it seemed 5 directors led the Montana VA since 2009. What do you attribute it to? Why is there so much turnover in the Montana VA in particular?
Let me talk about what my goal is here and where I've been focusing the majority of my attention, and that has been to rural and Native America. And I'll tell you why. It's a very simple fact. Rural Americans, Native Americans, serve the military in higher numbers than any groups in the country. And I often use Montana as an example as to how we need to be more flexible in our service, but also be more creative in getting people out to rural America. I've said this in testimony, that we have to have a VA equivalent of the Peace Corps, whereby in exchange for service, we do more to alleviate the medical loan debt for our doctors and nurses, that we compensate our medical professionals at a higher rate than is accepted by the usual federal pay scales for service in underserved areas. And Montana has always been the the topic, the subject that I've hit as an example as to why we need to do that. Montana, in terms of per capita military service, is in the top 10. It's a place where warriors not only come from, but they go back home too. And we have to get our healthcare providers into Montana and to our rural areas in a better way than we have. So I do have the authorities to offer higher compensation, which we are, but I need more when it comes to alleviating that educational debt in exchange for a long and defined period of service. And I think we can get our arms around the issues that Montanans have faced in the last few years. It's known to me because my wife's uncle was part for years and years of your great agriculture radio network. He was with Conrad Burns when Burns was on radio.
Oh, sure. Yeah, who's that? I might know
John
him.
John Black.
Okay, all right, yeah.
And,
I used to work with Conrad back in the day too. Yeah.
still lives in Kalispell. So I have a familiarity with your area that's not born of just watching it from a distance.
Well, and on that front, veterans, Montana, the distances, from one stretch from one corner of Montana to the other. It's like driving from Chicago to Washington, D.C.
Right.
And one of the things,
we're talking about 800 miles in round trip.
And one of the things that's really frustrating for veterans, and take a female veteran, for example. A female veteran might be told, hey, you got to drive all the way across the state, and then you're going to go see a male doctor, not the female doctor that you want to see in your own town.
Right.
And I remember seeing a headline a few months ago, and it was this big headline, Billings VA gets dentist, and this was big news, and it was the same day that SpaceX, the private sector SpaceX, was launching the world's most powerful rocket into space, and I thought, the VA's hailing the fact that we got a dentist, and it's like, I guess my question is, there seem to be some that are more concerned about protecting the VA bureaucracy than they are about saying what's best for veterans, and sometimes that means going to a private sector hospital for health care.
It does, and that is the key. It is the health interest of the veteran that has to be at the center of what we do, not the prerogatives of the institution. And it makes no sense. It makes absolutely no sense that we would force Montanans to drive 700 miles round trip to go to a VA facility when they can see someone in their hometown. So let me just say it two ways. Montanans have choice. They are carved out because of the rural nature of the state. But this wider mission act that we are launching on the 6th of June is there for veterans when VA cannot provide services that they need in a timely manner. And I changed the accessibility standards to standards that veterans understand, and that is not based on miles but based on minutes, and that applies equally to rural America as it does to New York City. And that is a key for us, making sure, as you said, that veteran is the center of care and not worrying about how hurt the VA's feelings might be if someone decides to go to a local doctor.
We're joined by President Trump's Secretary of Veterans Affairs, VA Secretary Robert Wilkie. And Mr. Secretary, again, great to have you on the show this morning. We got cut off by that last break, but I know you wanted to make a point about what's in the best interest of the veterans, not what's in the best interest of the bureaucracy, what's in the best interest of the veterans.
And I wanted to pick up on a point that you made about the President of the United States. I'm a pretty good historian, and I can tell you that no candidate, no president since the end of World War II has ever made veterans the centerpiece of both the campaign and then the administration. And one of the examples I used in testimony, I was the acting VA secretary for 8 weeks last year before I went back to the Pentagon and then came back here permanently. And I can tell you, being acting is being in limbo. You are, but you're not. But the President of the United States in that 8 weeks spent almost 9 hours about 8.75 hours with me in meetings, on the phone, at dinner, asking very deep questions about veterans, military service, and how to change the VA. That told me that he had a commitment to this institution, but to veterans writ large, that you correctly said you didn't see in previous administrations. And what he's allowed us to do is launch a series of very far-reaching reforms that, again, put the veteran at the center of his care. The other thing that he's done, and it is an issue that has particularly sad impact on Montana, is that he has created the first national task force on suicide prevention that I am the head of. And this will allow us to create a whole health, whole of government approach to this national tragedy. And one of the reasons, and I'll be in Montana, I believe, in September and October, talking to the Native communities as well as your veterans. 14 of the 20 veterans who take their lives every day have no contact with us. They've never come to VA. And in a place like Montana, many people go to get away because of the massive distances. You can lose yourself in Montana. And in order for us to find those veterans and help them, it can't be just the government. We're not capable of doing all of those things that we need to do or are expected to do. We need the help from the localities, from the state government, as well as from the native peoples, the native nations of your state.
We and that's a huge topic. I want to ask you more about this topic of suicide, and yeah, we've actually had mayors from a couple, from here in Montana, who, in fact, one of the mayors, I think the mayor of Billings, was back at the White House when this executive order was signed, and along with Seth Bergley, a representative from our legislature. He's a great Army veteran as well. So I want to go back to the suicide question here in just a second, but we also got a phone call from Carl, a veteran in northwestern Montana, and I think he was asking about pain management. And I would second his question here. He says, when is the VA going to listen to the doctors instead of the administrators? You show up at your VA doctor and they say, well, I'm going to try to get you this, but I don't think Helen is going to approve it. I don't think Fort Harrison will agree to it. When are they going to listen to the doctors instead of the administrators, was Carl's question.
Well, if it's about pain management, we are. And it's been my goal to help us reduce the rate of prescription for opioids. We've reduced it by about 51%, and we are listening to the doctors in the sense that we are finding alternative methods to treat terrible pain. What the general public, not the veterans public, but the general public doesn't seem to understand, and I put a lot of politicians in this category, is that most of our people are just like professional athletes, like my father, that come to VA after 30 years of war, 30 years of jumping out of an airplane, meaning you need 2 new hips, 2 new knees, and they come to us with chronic pain. However, in the traditional way of treating that has been to treat the brain and not the pain. And what our doctors are telling us is that there are other ways when it comes to pain management. And our goal is to not increase the prevalence of these drugs that are creating a terrible national tragedy. But we are listening to the clinicians.
Yeah, that's great. And there's an organization, the Paul Gardner Veteran Pains Relief Foundation, that's focused on doing just that here in Montana, which I can personally vouch for is doing incredible things. The topic of veteran suicide, and these numbers are just staggering, and it's just heartbreaking. We see it here in Montana, unfortunately, just like everywhere else across the country.
Right.
Did you see Senator Tester was on Face the Nation on CBS over the weekend, and he appeared to politicize the issue of veteran suicide. I don't know if you caught that clip or not.
Yeah. Well, politicizing this issue just compounds a national tragedy. There's no silver bullet. There is no finger to point at someone and say you fell down on the job. Give you an example. I think the premise of his remarks was that we're not doing enough, and he said, look at the last suicide on a VA campus. Well, the last suicide on a VA campus took place in Cleveland. where the veteran was looking at a life following disfiguring surgery for cancer. He was slated to lose his vocal cords. They were going to remove one of his eyes and half of his jawbone. And he decided he did not want to live that way, and he came to us. He came to our facility, sadly took his life, but he wanted us to take care of his mother. There's no one thread that ties all of this together. We need a national conversation on life. We don't need 50 million new programs. We have money in the budget for suicide outreach. We have we have a budget now, and I think he was criticizing the budget, but we have $9.5 billion in our budget right now for mental health services. And I think what we need to do as a society is have that national conversation about life, because it's not just us. The last time I testified in front of Senator Tester, that same day, the New York Times and National Public Radio had a piece about the spike in teenage suicides resulting from viewing this Netflix show called 13 Reasons Why, which is about teenagers dying. It's affecting every part of society. And what the president has done is recognize that, and he's bringing together the best minds to tackle not just this last tragic act, but mental health. We still are at the Sputnik stage when it comes to getting our arms around mental health issues. So this one should not be a vehicle for political gotcha. There's too much at stake on this matter than to have it turn into another political mud fight.
Well, and I would add, from my perspective, Senator Tester's been on the VA committee for how long now? And we've seen how many problems in Montana in particular, and we didn't start to see some fixes and some positive change happening, really, until President Donald Trump was elected president and started making some of this stuff happen.
Senator Tester's a friend. There's nobody who cares as much about veterans as he does. I just want to make it clear that things have changed because of this president. As I said earlier, no president's ever given this much attention to this institution. No president has ever presented a bigger budget. The budget I presented on behalf of Donald Trump was $220 billion. You didn't hear that in the last administration. $220 billion. $9.5 billion of that to mental health, and for Montana, $1.5 billion for telehealth, so we can get our doctors, no matter where they are, if they're in Denver, if they're in St. Louis, and they are experts in a field of medicine that the veteran needs, they can now reach into that veteran's home and treat that veteran across state lines. Telehealth is the wave of the future, particularly for rural America. It is the wave of the future, particularly when it comes to treating mental health issues.
Well, Mr. Secretary, VA Secretary Robert Wilkie, I know you've got to run. We've already held you much longer than I think we initially had time for, unless you want to stick around, but I imagine you're a busy man. So.
Well, I've got to go, but I do want to say one thing about Montana. And we do have family connections in Montana, but it's one place you go to where you don't need to explain military service to anybody.